Don't forget to like, subscribe.
The topic that we are going to discuss now is sand and dust storms. So what are sand and dust storms? Why are they in news? And it is based on what convention? I mean, which convention is related to this sand and dust storms? This we need to understand. So the recent meetings of United Nations Convention on, to combat desertification, UNCCD. So United Nations Convention to combat desertification. This convention is what is related to this sand and dust storms. Okay, they are highlighting the dangers of sand and dust storms. Okay, so in the recent meeting they shed light on the far-reaching consequences of the sand and dust storms and propose crucial policy recommendation to mitigate its effects. Okay, then next, what is sand and dust storm? They are meteorological events, okay, that occur when strong wind lifts the large amount of sand and dust particles from the ground and transport them over a long distance. Okay, so there is strong wind which is transporting a large amount of dust and sand particles from the ground, and then it is being transported to a large distance. Okay, even transboundary country to country travel is also happening, okay, which is a major concern here. So they mainly affect the arid and semi-arid regions. Very important. Obviously, only in such arid and semi-arid regions you will be having such loose sand which is not bound, okay, which does not have much moisture. Okay, only such sand can be transported by heavy or strong winds. Okay, but can also impact areas far from their sources. This is also important. So it is not only restricted to arid and semi-arid regions, but it can also impact areas which is far from their source. Next is, annually over 2 billion tons of sand and dust traverse an extensive distance across the Earth's atmosphere. So this much of sand and dust is being traveled because of these winds. Such winds are called as, or such storms are called as sand and dust storms. Okay, so what are all the sources of sand and dust storms and what are all the impacts of this storm? That is what we need to know from this news article. This can be a mains related question. Okay, next, the sources of the sand and dust storm. First thing is, according to UNCCD, this sand and dust storms are caused by both natural and anthropogenic sources, okay, or factors. So it is both natural and human. So about 75% of the global dust emissions originate from the natural sources only, from the dry lands of the world. For example, hyper-arid regions, topographic depressions, and then dry ancient lake beds. From these regions, these sand particles are being carried. Okay, next is the remaining 25% is obviously attributed to the human activities, because there are only two factors. One is natural and then the other is human factor. 75% is contributed by the natural factors, so the rest is contributed by the human or the anthropogenic factors. So what are all the anthropogenic causes of the sand and dust storms? First one is unsustainable agricultural practices. Okay, so activities like tillage, land clearing, and abandoned croplands, these are all the activities which is contributing to sand and dust storms. Okay, so they release dust or they emit dust which is being carried by these strong winds. Next is, what other anthropogenic causes do we have? Land use change. Because of deforestation and urbanization, it contributes to deep stabilization of surfaces, which enhances dust emission. Okay, so when the surfaces are destabilized, it enhances the dust emission. And water diversion, this is one major cause of the sand and dust storms. How? So excessive diversion of water from the river for agriculture purpose can lead to a shrinkage of water bodies. So say for example, there is a water body, but if excessive water is being extracted from this water body for the purpose of agriculture, then that water body will shrink over a period of time. Okay, say for example, for decades, if it is being extracted, then it will shrink. Okay, so because of this shrinkage, the areas which was earlier occupied by the water will now become desert like. Okay, so Desert obviously has loose sand or dust particles which will be carried. So this is how it is linked. Okay, so thus creating new source of sand and dust storms. So the best example here is the excessive diversion of water from the rivers in Central Asia over several decades toward agriculture has shrunk the Aral Sea. Okay, we all know that Aral Sea is getting smaller and smaller in its size. Earlier it was big, okay, but then it is reducing in size. Okay, that is because of this continuous extraction of water from these river sources. I mean the river which feeds the Aral Sea. Okay, so this desert like condition is happening. So it has now become Aralkum Desert. So earlier it was Aral Sea, it was a big sea, but now it has become Aralkum Desert. Okay, which is a significant new source of sand and dust storms in Central Asian region. Okay, so this is how it is linked. That is water diversion. Next is climate related amplifiers. Even climate related amplifiers are there, which means climate change is influencing these dust and sandstorms. Okay, so aridity and minimal precipitation are two main reasons which is related to climate change. Okay, so high air temperature and minimal precipitation and arid condition acts as drivers which amplify the likelihood and intensity of these storms. Okay, next is extreme weather events are also responsible for these dust and sandstorms. Okay, so intensified wind pattern and prolonged droughts due to climate change aggravate the severity and frequency of dust storms. So wind pattern is changing and prolonged drought all are because of this climate change only. So climate change is being a major cause for this dust and sandstorm. So you must also understand that this is also a natural cause. Okay, so climate change is also majorly natural cause, but then it is also influenced by other anthropogenic activities. That is why it has been categorized separately. We already saw natural causes, anthropogenic causes, and then we are seeing climate change because climate change is being induced naturally and also by human activities. Okay, so that is why it is a separate category here. Next is what are all the impacts of this sand and dust storm. First is soil degradation is going to happen. Okay, so sand and dust storms strip away fertile topsoil. So topsoil is there. Generally topsoil is fertile, it has nutrients, high amount of nutrient content, but then because of this sand and dust storm this topsoil is being carried away. Okay, so it strips off the fertile topsoil, thus affecting soil quality and fertility. Next is ecosystem disruption is also happening. So because of these storms, it can alter the ecosystem by burying vegetation, disrupting natural habitats and affecting wildlife. So it buries vegetation, already existing vegetation. Say for example, a vegetation is of this height. Okay, is of this height, and if huge amount of dust is being carried, then it will spread throughout these vegetation. Okay, so thus it buries the vegetation, disrupting natural habitats and affecting wildlife also, which is dependent on these vegetation. Okay, and then invasive species can also be carried by these storms, which will affect ecosystem again. Okay, so it will outcompete the native species, thus leading to biodiversity loss and ecological imbalance. These are all the problems which are caused due to this dust and sandstorm. Okay, next is socio-economic impact. Health impact is also there. Okay, how is health impacted? Because respiratory problems might occur because of these dust and sand particles. Okay, so affecting respiratory health, causing allergies, and it also aggravates the existing conditions like asthma. People who are having asthma are at high risk of the problem getting aggravated because of these dust and sandstorm. Okay, next is what other socio-economic impacts do we have? Economic loss. What kind of economic loss? Because it is going to damage infrastructures. These sand and dust particles are going to impact infrastructures, reduce agriculture productivity, disrupt transportation and increase healthcare costs. Okay, all these are going to lead to economic losses, and these events can also impact tourism and trade. Okay, because tourism and trade must be very peaceful. Okay, if it is being interrupted by such storms and other strong winds, then this also leads to economic loss. Okay, so these events can also impact tourism and trade, affecting local as well as regional economies, and there is also global implication to it. One is transboundary impact, like we discussed already. So sand and dust storms do not adhere to the geopolitical boundaries, because it does not know which is boundary or which is not. Okay, so if these two are the countries, sand particles and dust particles from this country might travel to this country, so it does not adhere to transboundary geopolitical boundaries, and they can cross borders affecting multiple countries. And climate change is also happening because of these dust and storm, sand and dust storm. Okay, so by impacting weather patterns and potentially contributing to climate change. So climate change is a factor which is affecting this, which is a factor which is responsible for this dust and sandstorm, and then the vice versa is also possible, which means these sand and dust storm is also inducing climate change, because the weather pattern is going to get affected because of these storms. Okay, so this is what we need to know about dust and sandstorm.